Rod Stewart, a name synonymous with rock music, freedom, rebellion, and defiance, has spent more than 60 years on stage, sold millions of records, and delivered hits that became the soundtrack of a generation. With his signature voluminous hair and a raspy voice like no other, he always seemed invincible. But in an interview celebrating his 80th birthday, Rod didn't recount his glory days or mention awards and legendary tours. Instead, he spoke of a part of his life the public had never seen. Not a scandal, not a media shock, but a truth he'd avoided for decades. The confession left audiences silent and reflective. A symbol can last 60 years, but it can also hide a deep fear for a lifetime. Rod began in London's small pubs, armed with only a unique voice and a standout appearance, singing anywhere people would listen. When he joined the Faces, everything changed. Soon after, his solo career catapulted him into fame with unforgettable tracks like Maggie May, Sailing, and Tonight's the Night. He became the embodiment of confidence and a pop culture icon, but behind the stage persona was a man often alone, waking up in hotel rooms with no memory of the night before, relying on pills to sleep and something else to wake up. "I loved everything music gave me, except the price I had to pay for it," he once said. That price chipped away at him day by day, his personal life strained, relationships fleeting, and no time to stop and reflect. He had to perform, not just as a singer, but as the Rod Stewart. At times, he vanished from the spotlight entirely. The media speculated, but the truth was silence had become his survival strategy. He saw his own descent, but stayed silent because the applause kept coming. The music industry didn't ask how he felt, only whether he was still selling tickets, and he was. Yet deep down, he was tired, so tired he no longer knew who or what he was living for. He didn't collapse, but he was no longer fully standing, even though no one noticed. The bold image remained, but behind it was a man losing control. Some in the industry saw it and worried, but for Rod, silence was safer. It disappointed no one. The consequences of fame couldn't be undone, especially in his personal life. As his career soared, family fell behind. His children grew up without him in the pictures or at the breakfast table. He always thought he'd make it up to them later, after a tour, after an album, but later never came. He didn't blame the industry. "I put myself first," he said. "I thought I was doing it for their future, but the truth is I chose the spotlight because I didn't know how to live without it." He once went on tour with a high fever, boarded a plane after being hospitalized, all for the show, for the image. Saying no meant appearing weak, so even when exhausted or in pain, he kept going. His marriage to Rachel Hunter deteriorated. They were never truly ready. With Penny Lancaster, his future wife, things were rocky too, arguments, silence, distance, but she stayed. And more importantly, she made Rod confront himself. In a private moment, he admitted, "I used to think I was invincible, but I was the one who destroyed everything." No tears, no drama, just a quiet realization that resonated with those who knew what he'd missed. He was never the perfect father, and he knew it. His kids didn't grow up with him consistently. One even called him by his name in an interview. Another wouldn't share a dinner table for years. But he never blamed them, only himself. Fame helped him survive, but made him lose his way. When the image of invincibility broke, he realized everything he'd once sidelined wasn't waiting anymore. Still, he didn't give up. He rebuilt, slowly and sincerely, becoming a father again bit by bit. No grand gesture, just consistency. He started calling more, showing up for events he used to miss. Not every attempt was welcomed warmly, but he persisted. With no stage left to perform on, he learned to listen, really listen, for the first time. A pivotal moment came when his eldest daughter wrote a short letter. "You don't need to do anything big. Just be there." That silenced him more than any applause. From then on, he showed up. Quietly. He sat at the table with his family, no phone, even cooking dinner himself, imperfect, but enough. In his relationship with Penny, he stopped hiding emotions. They had nights watching old movies, talking about nothing, or simply sitting in silence, a silence that was no longer awkward, but peaceful. Both of them cherished Penny. She once said, "Rod is no longer someone who always needs attention. He's learning how to step back and give space to others, and strangely enough, that's when he feels closer to me than ever." Rod was never good with words, but the first time he apologized to his youngest son, the sentence came out clear and direct. "I'm sorry I wasn't there." No excuses, no promises. And it was the first time the child reached out to hug him. No performance ever moved him the way it did when one of his children sat beside him at the dinner table and shared about their week at school. No song ever sounded better than the laughter of the whole family when he burned the meat during his first backyard barbecue attempt. In one interview, when someone asked what kept him going during his darkest times, he didn't mention music or the fans. He simply replied, "Forgiveness." Then he added, "Not because people forgave me, but because I learned how to say sorry. I used to think music saved me, but no, it was forgiveness from others and from myself that really did." Rod's rebirth wasn't loud. It had no lights, no theme song, no celebration. It was just a man finally willing to put his ego aside to hold on to what he still had time to save. And then, just when everything seemed to have settled, he chose to tell the darkest part of his life story for the first time. At the age of 80, the confession changed everything. The interview was filmed on a late afternoon in London, inside a room that was simple and unpretentious. Rod Stewart sat there, his hair silver but still carrying that familiar look, a fitted suit, polished leather shoes, a timely smile, and eyes with a mischievous glint, just like the way he once looked into the camera in the 1970s. It was his 80th birthday, and the show was simply a conversation, not to promote anything, not to launch a new tour, not to relive a legend, just to talk. The host asked about age, about reflecting on one's life. Rod spoke of many familiar things, his favorite songs, the stages he couldn't forget, the streets he lived on in his youth. But then, when the question turned to regrets, he paused and said directly, "I had prostate cancer." He didn't dodge, didn't lead in. The host didn't react dramatically, just nodded slightly, but the atmosphere changed. The room went quiet, not because people hadn't heard of it, but because of the way Rod said it. Calm, direct, like he'd waited for just the right moment. "I found out years ago. I was treated. I recovered," he continued. "And I didn't say anything. No one knew. I kept it to myself." His voice didn't shake, but it deepened. "I didn't stay silent because I was strong. I stayed silent because I was afraid people would see me differently, think Rod Stewart was fading, getting weak, past his time." He spoke about performing during recovery, taking painkillers before going on stage, sweating not from the lights but from the side effects, forgetting which songs he'd performed, walking straight off stage into a room alone. But he never canceled a show. "I was taught that rock and roll has no place for weakness," he said. "I lived my whole life with that image. I forced myself to uphold it to the point I forgot I was just a human being." Rod went on to talk about his years of addiction, of waking up in hotels not knowing what country he was in, disappearing for days after parties that lasted too long. "I thought I was living, but in reality, I was just running from myself." He spoke of how the music industry glorifies invincibility, where exhaustion means pushing on, pain means smiling, and collapse is spun into creative inspiration. "There were moments I wanted to quit," he admitted, "but they said if you stop, someone else will take your place. So I kept going. No one forced me, but no one offered me a way out either." The confession wasn't polished. It was fragmented, out of order, but real, like he was speaking without fear for the first time. "I don't need pity," he concluded. "I just want to tell the truth, not to unburden myself, but because if I don't say it, maybe someone else will choose silence the way I once did." When the program ended, no one clapped, not because they weren't moved, but because clapping didn't feel right. Some bowed their heads. Others stood up and sat back down. The room no longer felt like an interview, but a final sharing where there was nothing left to hold back. After everything, Rod Stewart entered a new chapter, no longer under stage lights, but in a quieter place where he left behind the most meaningful thing in his journey, life after the spotlight. He reappeared a month later in a short home video, not to promote, not to sing, but to announce the launch of a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting men with prostate cancer. It wasn't flashy. The goal was simple: provide information, offer emotional support, and create a space to talk about what most men hide. "I'm not a doctor. I don't have a cure," Rod said slowly, "but I know what it feels like to pretend you're okay. And I don't want others to keep living that way." He joined community campaigns, not as a celebrity on stage, but face-to-face with men his age, sharing his story with honesty. At one gathering, someone asked, "Why now?" Rod just smiled, "Because I'm not afraid anymore." He became the face of the Talk About It campaign, urging men to speak openly about health and mental well-being. No edited images, no scripts. Every time he appeared, he repeated the same message: don't ignore when your body feels wrong. Don't think silence means strength. And above all, don't wait until it's too late. At the same time, he completed a new album, possibly his last. It didn't carry the lavish tone of his past work. The melodies were stripped down, the lyrics unpolished. One song felt like a letter to his son. Another repeated one line: "I forgive me." He didn't tour, release a deluxe edition, or hold a press conference. He simply included a handwritten letter, truly handwritten, not typed, with the album, thanking fans for standing by him, apologizing for staying silent, and encouraging them to live authentically while there's still time. At 80, Rod Stewart no longer cared about topping charts. He focused on family. A few months ago, he welcomed his first granddaughter, Elsie, the daughter of Liam Stewart and Nicole. At the same time, his daughter Kimberly announced she was expecting. Rod was about to become a grandfather again. He said playing with the baby in the yard, watching his children become parents, brought a feeling the stage never could. Music remained inseparable from him, and although he scaled back performances, he confirmed he would return to Glastonbury Festival in 2025 after more than 20 years, this time not to prove anything, but simply to greet those who had grown up with him. He shared briefly, "After all these years, I'm proud, ready, and absolutely able to bring joy once more to my friends at Glastonbury this June. There's no need for a final stage to say goodbye, just a place to remind people he's still here. Not as a legend, but as someone who once lost his way, once stayed silent, and now lives truthfully, leaving behind something far more valuable than fame or accolades."